My name is Raymond Santana. I'm one of the Central Park Five. In 1989, myself, Yusuf Salam, Corey Wise, Antron McCray, and Kevin Richardson were charged, tried, and convicted of the rape of the Central Park jogger. And we all served upwards from 7 years, and Corey served 13 and a half years. And in 2002, they found an actual rapist. He actually came forward. They didn't find him. He found them, and the city didn't want to believe him. Even though he was known as the East Side Slasher, his name was Mateus Reyes. He was known as the East Side Rapist, and they finally tested his DNA and it matched. And they finally did an investigation and found out that he was the only culprit in this case. We was fully exonerated. All charges was dropped. There was no charges pending, which means that we were totally innocent of all charges. Well, there were over 400 articles written on us within the first 2 weeks of this case. And so for a 14-year-old kid, my life was dissected early on. Like, they went and they dug into my history and they pulled out stuff that they thought that they can use against us to paint this picture, to show the public that, to try to show the public as us being animals. And so what happened is that it generated like an emotional outcry. People wanted to, they wanted to see somebody pay for this crime and right away. And it also made people not care what happened to us. Again, I think that race played a big role in this case. We were five Hispanic and Black youths from Harlem, and the people ate the story up. It sounded that good. Sometimes as a people, we tend to gravitate towards negatives, negativity. We love to see violent movies and violent programs, and this was something that instilled fear in a lot of people. These Black and Latino kids were now going to something that was considered holy, Central Park, and now we were preying on white people. Definitely, 100%. I mean, this woman went on, and she went on to write fiction. She went on to write numerous books. She made millions of dollars, and to this day, she still acknowledges that she did nothing wrong in this case. Even though she was the head of the sex crimes unit, she claims that she never even knew about Mateus Reyes until 2002. So she had a great deal. She also acted as the lead investigator in this case, which is also why she's involved in a lawsuit now with the city. Currently it's pending. Like, right now we're still in like discovery phase, and we're doing depositions, and there have been over 60 depositions have been taken. We're just about to finish the depositions this month coming. What's the next step? I'm not sure. But it's been a 10-year long process. The city likes to, they like to use these tactics against us where they try to drag out these cases, whereas they give you these documents they want you to sign, which is them looking into your life, and they go back into your history. For my dad, they went back 25 years into his history, and they wanted to know all the doctors he's seen. Has he ever been on comp or took any type of medical leaves, stuff like that, so that they can use to discredit you, when it comes down to your deposition, because this case is all about credibility at the end of the day. My relationship, my dad was like the only one. I came from a big family. I have 5 uncles on one side, 3 uncles on another side. And my dad was the only one who really supported me throughout the whole trial. Everybody thought I was guilty. They turned their backs on me. And he was the only person I had at that time. Since then, at time heals all wounds, and you learn to forgive. When people come and they apologize, I had uncles who apologized, I had cousins who apologized for not being there, and I didn't hold a grudge. I accepted their apology. Yeah, I mean, a great deal. I was the only, I felt like I was alone, and I had to learn from a lot of, from being in prison. And Malia saved me in a lot of ways. When I came home and I didn't know how to function, and here I was, I had this life that was put into my hands, and I had to be responsible for, and I had to be a parent. And she saved me from doing a lot of things and from learning a lot of mistakes, from making a lot of mistakes, because now I had to walk on eggshells because of this kid. You know, it's funny. She told me one night I was in my room and she said, you know, Daddy, I know who the Central Park Five are. And so I said, well, tell me who they are. And she was 8 at the time. And she goes on to summarize this whole case. And so I said, well, how do you know this? And she says, well, there's YouTube. You know, she was going on YouTube and she was pulling up the case. And then she said, there's also you and Mommy. I hear you on the phone talking. And so one night we doing the screen at the IFC Center in the Village. And she asked us, can she watch the film? And I said, yeah. So I let her watch it. And she came out and she said, you know, I didn't know you was one of the Central Park Five. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, I thought you was maybe a producer, a director. And I said, no, I'm in the film. Like, I'm one of the five. For me, stuff happens and you don't understand why it happens. You know, there was a point in time in my life where I hit rock bottom and I felt like I had nothing else. And that was the point where I stopped caring about everything. Life, what happened to me, because I figured that I was going to go to my grave as Raymond Santana, one of the Central Park rapists. And so I didn't care about anything anymore, which landed me back in prison. And then from there, things started to change for me. Because once you hit rock bottom, you can't go nowhere but back up. And in that time, I got exonerated. And everything started to change for me. And I don't know where it comes from. But I just know that the focus is that you have to move forward because this case is still pending. And a lot of people depend on me to come through and deliver, you know, whatever message that I've been given to give out, you know. And so that becomes part of the motivation, you know, also Malia, you know, that I know that here's a child that I'm going to leave behind and someday, and I want her to be well off, you know, whether it's financially or spiritually or emotionally, you know. And I think that becomes part of my motivation. Well, I don't hold bitterness, you know. I hold them responsible, you know. I hold them responsible for not doing their jobs properly, you know. When the DNA evidence came back and it said that Mateus, you know, when the DNA evidence came back and it proved that we were not the culprits, you know, somebody should have stopped the investigation and went back and reinvestigated, because this was a situation where they took footprints, handprints, they took our clothes, they took hair samples, they took blood samples, they had a sample already, you know, and nothing came back to match. And right then and there, somebody should have stopped the investigation, go back and reinvestigate, even question us again. And nobody did that. So it was a failure for them to do their jobs, for them to uphold, you know, justice. Yeah, there's a book. It's called The Blood That Cried. It's by a man named Howard Levy. And he worked in the DA's office at the time. He worked with DNA evidence. And what happened was, in this chapter, is a chapter about us that he talks about. Now, this book was written years before Reyes even came about. There's even a chapter on Reyes in the book. And so what happens is that he, in the chapter, he goes to talk about how he got to receive the phone call from Elizabeth Lederer, who was the prosecutor in this case. And she calls him to her office and she says, look, I feel like I've just been kicked in my stomach because the DNA came back and nothing matches, none of the five. And right then and there, in that chapter, is where they start to formulate the plan of how they're going to convict us. And that's so powerful. It's so, because it became testimony. And Howard Levy had to come and be deposed, you know, because of that. And this was a man who wrote a chapter and never knew that these words were going to come back to haunt him. And that's our goal. Our goal is to look at these false confessions and to analyze them and for people to understand why do they happen. Because first, that's where the problem starts. People have to understand, why do people confess to something that they didn't do? And once we understand that, then we can understand why these cases exist. And then we could. She got victimized twice. You know, she got victimized by Mateus Reyes, and she also got victimized by the police and prosecutors who befriended her throughout this case. And so they led her to believe that we were guilty all these years. And even when the evidence came out and proved that we were innocent, they still stood fast with that. So we understand that she's dealing with a lot of pressure. You know, she's been through a lot. And so we don't want to put any extra pressure to meet with her. But we always say that our doors are open if she ever wants to speak to us. You know, I get that question a lot. And I tell them, I say, we're not friends. We're not friends at all. You know, we're brothers now. You know, we were all thrown into a situation that we had no choice, and we had to deal with it. I mean, you know, I speak to Yusuf all the time. Antron just called me a little while ago before I was coming here to do this interview. We meet him speak constantly on the phone. Corey, you know, whenever he's in Harlem, he stops by, he sees my father, and the same thing with Kevin. So, you know, this case, we didn't know each other. I didn't know these other guys. But now, you know, we became family. You know, I go to see Antron. He's in Georgia. He comes up, and he introduces his kids to me as their uncle now. Well, we met Sarah in 2002. She was an intern at our lawyer's office named Jonathan Moore. He was one of the attorneys on his case. And what happened was, you know, she wanted to just write a paper. And so that was fine. You know, she wrote a paper, but not about the case, but basically about the media's portrayal with our case. And in her doing all of this research, you know, she read transcripts, she did everything. She became outraged. And she felt like she needed to do more. She couldn't let this case go. So she came back about 4 years later, and she proposed to write a book. And at that point, nobody else proposed to write a book. So we felt like this was the only person who, you know, really wanted to do something, who really wanted to help. And so we agreed. And so as we was working on the book, she was working on the book, we never knew her father was Ken Burns, you know, who's a great documentarian. And he used to edit some of the chapters that she wrote. And as him reading the story and him reading the chapters, he wanted to do a film. And it wasn't until we was almost done with the book that she proposed, let's do a film. And we met him, you know, and it worked out from there. And we was in, you know, we was all in 100%. And this was a woman who was on her way to law school. You know, her career was set, her path was set, and she changed it. And she didn't go to law school because she decided she wanted to help us fight injustice. You know, so we owe a great deal to Sarah and her dad and Dave McMahon, who's her husband. And he's also a co-director in the film.